Greetings all. Welcome back to the Coptimizer Podcast. Another awesome guest this week. Got Danny McGuire, PhD. So maybe that's Dr. Danny McGuire. I like it that way. Dr. Danny McGuire sounds better.
Well, I to be fair about that, I always kind of thought about when someone calls me doctor, it's uncomfortable because if you fall out, I can't help you, right? Like I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm an academic, so I could bore you before you meet the Lord, for a few minutes, but other than that, it's not, I'm not a medical doctor, but yes, I do have a doctorate of education. So yes, I have an EDD.
So tell me a little bit about your background and your law enforcement background and where you've landed as Dr. Danny McGuire.
Sure. I started in law enforcement. I figured out pretty early on, I wanted to be like my dad. I looked up to my dad. Other kids looked up to sports figures and music artists and stuff. I always kind of looked up to dad, and dad was in service. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. At the age of 18, I became an explorer in Palos Heights, Illinois. It's a small suburb southwest Chicago. Became a cadet explorer, then became one of the first community service officers. And this was like 1991. So it was a newer thing, the community service officer dynamic. And then in 92, at 21 years old, I got my first full-time sworn police job, and that was with the Cook County Sheriff's Police Department and a federally funded narcotics task force called the South Suburban Drug Initiative. And that was a federal grant that the Cook County Sheriff was involved in to combat narcotics out in the south suburbs of Harvey, Robbins, Dixmoor, Phoenix, Ford Heights, Markham, Chicago Heights, south suburbs of Cook County. After going to the police academy, some training, I went to the MEG unit where I was completely covert long-term narcotics investigations, what we were charged with. So I did that till about 1996. I was 25 and I went to Chicago police. It was my dream, just like dad. Got there, did patrol work, midnights. Then I went to special ops. Part of special ops, I got on the HBT team. Now they call it SWAT, but back then it was HBT. Did all the steps in that with containment and then sniper and the rest of the way. 2007 was promoted to sergeant, went back to patrol. Before that, I had to do a 90-day detail. During that time, Police Superintendent Phil Klein had this initiative where sergeants were sent to detective school and then the detective division for 90-day detail before going to sergeant school and then being promoted to sergeants. So I went to this 90-day detective division detail, which I did learn a lot. I was in the South Side area too, in violent crimes. It was a learning experience, very much. Detective job's very different than patrol. Very skilled people have those jobs as detectives. I had a lot of respect for them. Was promoted to sergeant, worked in patrol. And then, when you come from a place like special operations, and this is kind of a funny side note, you come from special operations or HBT or the SWAT team, whatever you want to call it, you're kind of spoiled. You're kind of spoiled. Your job is, you're waiting to get called, or you get to work out while you're working. You get to eat wherever you want. And you go back to patrol at midnights. That's not happening anymore. People are getting denied.
A lot of these conversations over the years.
Right. So my dad would say, in his words, the more skilled someone is, or just more specialized, the more they complain, and I could see that. So I went to patrol and I was amazed at how hard I forgot, I forgot that whole dynamic. And watching those young people, I want to call them kids, but they're kids. I'm 52 years old now. And back then I was 36, they're kids and they work so hard, and the thing I hated to hear would be like, 8:22, there's a burglar alarm on your beat. And they're like, oh, I was just going to ask for lunch, and they'd be like, well, you can't go to lunch until your burglar alarm's answered. And I'm like, no way. Just give it to me. Right. I'll take it. So that was a new dynamic, just answering calls. I'd answer 30 or 40 calls a night on my own, as a sergeant, which in a place like Chicago at that time, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it was kind of like a unique dynamic, and it made the people within the watch respect you. Like, hey, this is our frontline leader. You have this whole ideology about frontline leadership being the most important dynamic in law enforcement. The sergeant, you have the most contact with the charge. I mean, you were chief, Pat. So I might not ever see you,
Absolutely.
right? But I'm going to see my sergeant. So that person has to be the most trained with the best leadership skills, just my opinion. So I did that for a little while, and then I went back, and by that time it was called the SWAT team, and I went in a support capacity as the team leader or commanding officer of the weapons of mass destruction, safety, and support team. And with that came about 4 other duties, including later the chief hostage negotiator. While I was on a department, I went and earned my education. I got a bachelor's degree in law enforcement management from Calumet College of St. Joseph, where I work now, run the same program that I went through. Then I went and got a master's in counseling psychology from the Adler School of Professional Psychology. I was going to go to law school, and a commander in the police department who was a very dear friend, a man named Bill Powers, he passed on many years ago. He was a psychologist, and he taught at Adler. And I was considering law school, saw him at headquarters. He's like, why would you want to do that? It just seems like, the progression. I'm a police officer, law school, right? He's like, why don't you become a therapist? I think you'd be great at it. I know you, I know your personality. I think you'd be an excellent therapist. And I said, okay, well, I don't know anything about it. He's like, go this summer to Adler, take 2 classes. If you like it, become a therapist. I loved it. So I got my master's. I got my doctorate from Olivet Nazarene University in Bourbonnais. It was a doctorate in doctor of education, emphasis ethical leadership. And then when I left the job, I went and got 2 more masters. I got one from Clemson University in public administration, and then another one from the University of Georgia in foods and nutrition.
Wow. That's quite the resume.
Now I teach. So,
all right. So, well, that's awesome. That's great that you have the practical experience and the academic background now to be able to educate the next generation. So I want to go all the way back to the beginning. So starting as a community service officer at 18 years of age, I've had this conversation a few times. One of the biggest concerns I think that we have nationwide in policing right now is being able to attract young talent, being able to attract the people with the right character, integrity, skill sets to come into the profession. Your father was a police officer. You looked up to him, and that's something that you wanted to do. I've had the opportunity to teach new chiefs and to be exposed to a lot of different chiefs. And I think one of the concerns that I see when I go around, when I ask, and I'm guilty of this myself, when I ask other chiefs, hey, would you advocate for your own child or loved one or someone close to you to enter into the profession of law enforcement right now? And almost unilaterally, the answer is no. And then, which then the follow-up question is, are you engaging with them and telling them not to do this profession, or how's that go? And they're like, yeah, I tell them to do anything but policing. And, that's not necessarily a good sign for a healthy future in policing. And this is the message that I really hope that for maybe those listening to talk to those around them, the people that they do have some influence over, and just, start a conversation about what do you think policing in America is going to look like in 10 years if we don't have enough people going into the profession? That's a concern. So, I mean, I think it's so admirable when I see others, and my former deputy chief, his son is in policing, and they're just doing great, but you don't see that very much anymore. So I don't know for maybe someone like you that came up, the son of a police officer, what would your message be to listeners about having that conversation and getting people when they're young exposed to policing?
Yeah. So that's a good question, because most of the time as I said earlier, I teach at Calumet College, right? Applicable scenario I'm giving you here. So I'll have 20, 30 police officers in a master's class or an undergrad class, and we'll have this very same conversation. And they're like, hey, I cop, or I'll direct to your child. No, why? Well, I love my son, but he doesn't have the temperament, right? Like, he doesn't have the temperament for this job. He's he's a very kind man. He's 21 years old, right? By this time I was already out on the street when I was his age, right?
Yeah, which is,
so
that was very
right,
unusual back then.
right. 21 years old, gun, sworn, right hand, good to go, and working narcotics undercover, trying to buy drugs. It was a different dynamic. However, the things that are different nowadays is social media. It's a game changer, right? It's in my opinion, it can help, but it also hinders, because there's a lot of negativity. You have a snippet of a video that a scenario lasts 25 minutes or 30 minutes in interaction with somebody, and you're getting the 1 minute that, it went south, right? Sugar turned to poop. Here it is, right? And you're getting that 1 minute. So it's kind of leaving that impression on people. Like, I don't want people to hate me, right? So, like, my son he just doesn't have that temperament. Even if there was no social media, if I put him back in my time, he has the temperament to help, but it depends where he'd work, right? In a place like Chicago, he doesn't have the temperament. Someone getting in your face, yelling at you. They did it in 1992. They did it in 1996. They did the same stuff. We just didn't have people recording like they are now, right? They'd be saying evil, rotten things, and you just kind of walked it off. You're all right, whatever. I don't even know this person. So for me, I wouldn't recommend it to him. But when I have these conversations, a lot of it has to do with the environment today that kids are exposed to. How their temperaments, just like I said with my son, like their temperament, they just, most police officers are concerned about their children's temperament. The ones I've talked to, like, they just they couldn't deal with what we dealt with. I'm not sure that's true. That's a perception, right? I'm not sure that it's true, right? With training, and some good mentoring, I think that they would be able overcome that challenge of whatever they're deficient in the way of their personality or their temperament. So if my son Luke said to me, hey, Dad, I think I'm going to become a cop. I'm going to school for special ed, but I'm kind of sick of this stuff. So I think I want to go and be a cop. At first, I'd be like, understand what you're getting into, right? You're going to not have holidays off. You just can't call off of work, like, when you don't feel like going in, right? Like, you know what? I don't feel like coming in. Your PTO is planned out. You're going to get a furlough, and you're going to have to pick that furlough. So this way everyone else could pick, and sometimes promotional processes and things like that are not fair, right? That's one of the big argument I get from students, right? In the way of promotions in a place like Chicago. You sit down, you take a test, you get a score, and now you're going to be this tremendous leader. It's not necessarily how it works, right? So
not hardly.
Right. So that is one of the big arguments that I get. Well, not argument, discussions we have, right? And it turns into poor leadership. I don't have anybody to mentor me that's worth anything anymore. And they want to get away from this environment of, not having any kind of definitive leadership, if that makes sense. I think that's a big deal on why they would not recommend it for their child.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, quite frankly, our main sponsor for the show, Performance Protocol, I mean, it's an executive coaching company where we're taking law enforcement leaders and those with specialties in law enforcement, training them as coaches, so agencies can get engaged and offer particularly their young officers and their young leaders, give them an opportunity to be coached by somebody that's been there and done that in their shoes. And I think we go through cycles in policing where sometimes I think we do these things well, and then you get a new chief or you get new leadership that comes in and they change directions, and that it's kind of hard to really be consistent nationwide in terms of leadership development, or I should say, maybe it's not hard. Maybe that's not the right way to put it. I think maybe the better way to put it is we've just never truly appreciated how important that process is as a profession overall. And, being good enough isn't good enough. And that's kind of where, if that makes sense, in that we sometimes, on the opposite, in some cases, you get people that are good test takers that wind up getting promoted, but are not necessarily as proficient tactically or sound as others, and so they have leadership challenges. Trying to garner respect and those from them they're working with. And then on the flip side, sometimes you have some of the best technical and tactical expertise, people that get promoted, but no leadership skills, no person, they don't have the right personality for it, or they're not trained or taught the right way or mentored. So yeah, I mean, but when you got 1 million police officers in America, close to 1 million, and not, Chicago PD is top 5, size agencies in the country. It's like basically a small army that you're trying to manage. So
well, there's challenges there, like you said, there's challenges. So here, let me give you a couple scenarios. So when I first took over the program at Cal College, I was teaching a master's class, and there was this younger guy in there, right? I won't embarrass him by saying his name, right? But the minute I was taking role in class, like, you could tell this guy had an attitude. So I have the personality where I'm going to call you out, right? I'm going to say, hey, what's your problem? So I look at this young person and I go, hey, what's your problem? What's wrong with you? And everyone's like, oh, he's miserable. And I go, how old are you? He goes, I'm 26. I go, how long have you been on the job? He goes, I've been on for 3 years. I'm like, you're too young to be this salty, right? Like that. Should be like the best time of your life, right?
Oh yeah, heck yeah.
And right, I mean, you remember that time. Like, I remember people telling me when I got on the job, like, this job sucks. I don't know why you're doing this. They tell my dad, Dan, why are you letting young Dan go on the job? And I'm looking at him going, are you crazy? Like, there's something wrong with you.
They're paying me to go do this.
Right.
What are you talking about?
This is awesome. This is the best day of my life. Are you kidding me right now? So, but as time goes on, those things change, right? When you're exposed to different things. So I look at this young guy and I'm like, let's have a conversation after class, because, I'm a coach, right? I like coaching people. I like training people. I like mentoring people. I like doing those things. I just have this inherent love for people, especially my brothers and sisters. There's nothing I wouldn't do. Most people who know me, my current and former students, people who know me well, know that there's not much I wouldn't do for a police officer. Even when they're in the depths of, like, in some sort of scandal or whatever, I'm calling you. People might think you're nuclear. I'm not. I'm the person that's going to call you. I'm the person that tells you if you need something, I'll be there. I'm the one that's going to be there. Right. So I'm like, let's have a cup of coffee after class. So I take him for a cup of coffee. I'm like, what's going on with you, dude? And he goes, I'm going to sum it up for you, Doc, real quick. If I go to work tonight in the district I work in, which is on the South Side, and it's probably one of the worst districts to ever work in. He goes, I don't know anybody on this job, right? So I'm stuck. I can go to work tonight on midnights, maybe get in a foot chase, with somebody with a gun. This person turns around, squares up with me. I shoot him, and, God forbid, I get in a shooting. Could I still lose my job, get fired, even get criminally prosecuted for doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, what I was trained to do, what's in the rule book and everything, because this person might be related to somebody and now it's a news thing? I said, well, I mean, that's a stretch, but yeah, I guess you could. He goes, then why the F would I want to stay here? He goes, I'm going to use this opportunity to get my education. Then I'm going to go to the federal agencies. And I said, okay. And he did. I just spoke to him, I don't know, about 3 months ago. He's doing very well. He's in a federal agency now, and he's very happy. He's somewhere in Western America, like the West Coast. So he's very happy with what he's doing, and he's glad he did that. But he echoes many of the comments that you do get. Or after class, I'll say, hey, I'll stick around for 15 minutes. Let's have a conversation. And, I have people going, I want to leave this job. I'm going to move to Montana, buy like 1,000 acres, and I never want to talk to a human being again. I'm going to raise alpacas. Like, okay, what's an alpaca eat? I have no idea. Well, how are you going to raise alpacas if you don't know that? Let's prepare. right? Let's prepare you to take this step. It's not going to be tomorrow. You just can't, right? You have people leaving just locally, if you pay attention to social media and things like that. And I understand, oh, I saw it on Facebook. Oh, so it's got to be real, right? I know it's not real. But if you look at the numbers, people are leaving in droves, and people are leaving without even being pensionable. Like, yeah. I'm just leaving. It's not for me. And your earlier point of someone not recommending it for their child, I think that it's because we protect our family from the things that we see and the things that we do. And we don't want them going through the same ridiculousness that we have or that we see, if that makes sense. So, I mean, it's ultimate protection, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. And, that's also a great problem, because those are the people that we need oftentimes to step into those positions and do the job. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I don't, but I don't like that to be all doom and gloom on one thing.
No, right. No,
like
right,
all the wheels are coming off, because
right.
The opportunity is that America is starting to see what life would be like, especially in the major metropolitan areas, in a world where we don't support the police, where we don't have community accountability. And I know that was something that we were going to get to later, but we might as well just jump to it now, right? Because one of your you worked as a hostage negotiator, you trained in de-escalation. And when we chatted a few weeks ago, getting ready for this podcast, that was kind of one of the things that we touched on is, and I've had this conversation with several people, de-escalation is this, it's the buzzword around the country, and just people, why don't the police just de-escalate? Why don't they just de-escalate? And
I'm laughing because it's been done since inception of police work.
I know. And
right.
it's like, it's not anything new. I mean, that's the first thing that you're taught as a young police officer is, all right, how do you read the situation? How, separate people, de-escalate, calm people down, get them into a position where you can capture information, understand what's going on, make decisions that's going to solve a problem. And you can never do that when people are amped up, and particularly if you're fighting, right? So
I mean, it's never going to happen, right?
Yeah, and you might have to fight and then de-escalate, right? And now I got you in handcuffs. Now you sit here for 15, 20, 30 minutes, or we go down to the station and you sit there for a while, and then we have the conversation. One way or another, it's got to happen. But de-escalation can never be a one-way conversation.
No, right. It's a two-way street. I mean, and when we did talk about it, and just speaking about it now and laughing about it, it's like it's the big buzzword. De-escalation. And then when you're in the academic world and these academics are talking about it, and you look at them and you go, you do realize since the day of organized police work in America happened, whatever that date was, 18 something, right? Police officers have been de-escalating. And they'll say, give me an example. And I'll say, okay, you get called to domestic, husband and wife fighting, partners fighting, whatever. Two people fighting with each other that live together and allegedly love each other, right? They're fighting with each other. You go in and you have backup, or however it works, and one person takes the one party and puts them in the corner here, the other party in that corner there, and each one of you are talking and they're calming down. That's de-escalation. So when they come up with all these de-escalation tactics and they start talking about, it's just a buzzword. It's like in any industry, they have their buzzwords. You can sound like you know what you're talking about if you know these 10 buzzwords, right? De-escalation happens to be one in ours. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. You find another profession out there. I challenge anybody to find another profession that do what we have done, guys like us that are no longer doing it, or the people that are doing it now, for the money they get, the scrutiny they face, and the danger they face every day. You're not going to find it anywhere. It's a very unique position. So when people talk about de-escalation and they have all these great ideas, it's like, it reminds me of a lieutenant I had on a job on the SWAT team. His name was Lieutenant Bossy, Fred Bossy. And people would say, like, doing this when Columbine happened, right? I mean, I was on the HBT team and we started training and guys are going, wait a minute, this isn't safe. This is not a safe way to do it. And he said, if you want a guaranteed safety, then take the day off. Right. And he also said, I don't want to go to training from a guy who read a book and decided to put together a training. I want to be trained by someone who has been there, done that, and understands it. So when people come up with all these ideas and they've never eaten that crap sandwich, you know, I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to drop the S word on the podcast.
That's okay.
Everyone who's listening knows exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
The proverbial shit sandwich. You take it one bite at a time. And no one who is, if people have never done that, I just find no credibility in their commentary. Now, not keeping it doom and gloom. Police departments are trying to address this. They're trying to enhance the training of de-escalation. But when you look at defunding the police and things of that nature, they have no training budget. I mean, how many police departments, Pat, have you talked to, or chiefs, or they have zero training budget? Or it's the first thing they cut.
It almost goes every time. And
right.
And when let's just use New York City for an example. And I was speaking with retired Inspector Sheehan from NYPD, and he used to run the training division for NYPD, and that we kind of got into the same conversation. And you would talk about scale, right? I mean, it's amazing how much they have to do with as many people as they have to push through it. But if you were to cut, like, it sounds, and it is a ton, right? $1 billion. You cut $1 billion out of the police budget, you're like, oh my gosh, like maybe some on the outside. Look at all the stuff that we could do with $1 billion. We could start new and different programs that are going to drive down the calls for service in policing. And let's just use an example and say, okay, in the fairy tale land that you live in, where that does work, how long do you think that's going to take? What do you think the lag time is? Oh, well, that's probably going to take 3 to 5 years at a minimum, right? Before you could even have any kind of evidence-based data that's going to suggest whether what the programs that you're implementing are effective or not. And in that meantime, that you're not cutting the salaries of the people that are there. So 90 to 92% of salaries for police departments go to paying, or the budgets go to paying salaries and benefits, healthcare costs, everything. So now you're less than, generally speaking, you're at 8 to 12% of a budget that's going to go towards operational costs. And now you got to buy body cameras, you got to buy equipment that goes on the belt, you have to buy laptops that go in the cars, you have to buy firearms, you have to buy bullets, you have to buy all these things. And then by the way, in there you also have to spend money on training. And then the biggest misconception that people have is that police officers are training all the time. Well, they're not, because police officers are working all the time. Because when people call 911, they expect somebody to show up. And so in order to get somebody to show up, you have to have people there to do the job. And then, so it is a vicious cycle. And unfortunately, training does get caught, and that just puts more pressure on your existing workforce. All for, I think is kind of, in a way, it's kind of like a grand illusion that's occurring right now. It's like, if we only trained our police officers better, then we would have better outcomes. And, I call that, it's the fundamental attribution error.
Right. It's exactly what it is.
We have a systems problem, not a people problem, and not a policing problem. It doesn't. And I say that not, and I believe that 100%, that policing has never been better in America. Does it mean that we can't be better? Absolutely not. There's always things that we're improving on. But if you go back even 20 years ago, the profession is so much better.
Sure.
So much improved.
The new generation of police officers are smarter than our generation. Just from a health standpoint, like when I came out of the job, everyone's smoking, hey, where are we going out partying after work? Now, I always make a joke, with the younger generation. I'm like, now you ask a young police officer, like, hey, you want to go get a couple beers after work? They'll be like, I'm going to run 6 miles. You're like, well, why are you going to run to the bar? I'll drive you. What's wrong with you? Right. Like, just from a health standpoint, they're in a different world. And from a cognitive standpoint, they are too. There's not, I mean, there's meatheads everywhere you go. And what I mean is like meatheads, like, yeah, pound, no one does that anymore. It's not, it's a different police world. And I agree with you that policing now is probably the best it's ever been. I do. When you were telling about the training budget, I remember being on the HBT team in a sniper, and we'd have to drive from wherever you lived in Chicago. In Chicago, you have to live in the city when you're a Chicago police officer. So you could live on the south side, north side, whatever. You have to drive to Great Lake Naval Base, right? So I think it's like North Chicago or something. So you're driving, if you live on the south side, like I did at that time, you're driving 2 hours to get there, hour and a half. You get there, and I'm not kidding you. There was 1 or 2 trainings where we went to, and guys, if you're listening to this, don't kill me if I'm a little inaccurate, but I'm positive there was a training as a sniper where we could only go and fire 1 bullet because we didn't have any bullets. I swear to you. And we all looked at each other like, are you kidding me right now? And then, one of the smart asses is like, well, all you need is 1 bullet as a sniper, right? 1 shot, 1 kill. You're like, yeah, okay. We were all sharing rifles. Like I shared a rifle with 1 or 2 other guys. Like, you're going to tell me the reticle on the scope is exactly the same? Like, you're trying to match us up close, or telling us aim for the chest because you can't miss. Like, you're like, are you kidding me right now? Like, I mean, this is what you had to deal with. My former lieutenant, Efred Bossy, he had 0 budget, like 0. Like whatever we could get our hands on, we took. So it's amazing what you can do when you don't have anything. There's a quote out there that says, we the willing, led by the unknowing, are doing the impossible for the ungrateful. We've done so much with nothing for so long. We don't know what it's like to do something with anything. Right. And I don't know. Right. I don't know who said that quote. Someone could Google it, but it's very true. And to take people, I had a friend who was working, we have a consent decree in Chicago, and he was one of the deputy monitors, right? And I worked in the academic world with him. He was never a police officer, the academic guy. And he's a great guy, right? Very great person. He wanted to come and help his city, things like that. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, you're delusional, right? Like, wait till you get here, right? And we're talking about training and people being deficient in training. And I'm like, dude, who's going to answer just working in the 8th district? I remember one night we had 356 calls for service because I called the OEMC because I couldn't believe it. It was like my first week back in patrol as a sergeant. Like, how many calls did we have last night? They're like 356, and that does not include stacked events. Like, are you kidding me? Like, in that 8 hours that everyone answered, they still wrote tickets. They still made arrests. They were like going in, processing paper, going right back out again. I just couldn't fathom that. Like, that's how much work they did. So who is going to cover that when they're at training, learning about de-escalation, which is something they do every single day, multiple times a day?
Yep. And not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's a survival tactic.
Correct.
Yeah. That's how you keep from getting yourself into a fight where force does escalate and people get hurt. Suspects and officers alike. So yeah, there are police departments, small agencies that won't run 356 calls in a year. Right. And, you got 1 shift in 1 precinct,
right?
That's running it in a night.
Right.
That's not the entire city. And so sometimes it's just, people just don't understand the scale of it. And that's why I try to always encourage community members, especially those that are outspoken about police reform. Go to a police department and participate in a citizens police academy. Don't just be a voice that's barking. Go participate, get a look behind the curtain, and actually see what's going on, and see what your police department is doing. Take some time to understand what policing in America really is before you try to recommend things that need to be changed. And that right now, everybody, it's easy to tweet, right? Like you were talking about social media. It's easy to fire off an opinion in 120 characters. And
Keyboard warrior.
Yeah.
Keyboard
Yeah.
warrior.
I've just
right?
look at with my tweet, I've just changed the world and I feel so much better about myself.
Your Twitter law degree. Here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You brought up a couple points that things are clicking in my head. One of them is, how can you be a command level person, right? Executive staff of a police department, when when you have political leadership, knowing that if you make the wrong decision, like even if it's a minuscule decision or it's an opinion difference, you're out. You're out. Like that's not a comfortable place to be for executives either, right? So how are you supposed to implement change and make sure these things happen if you know that the minute you make a decision, because you've done the same job for 20 plus years, so you understand this, and somebody in the political realm, and I'm not going political, I'm not being, not trying to say anything that
no, that's everywhere in America. That's just
right.
The way the system is set up.
But you got to admit, I'd have 31 years on a job right now, right? You would have extensive years on a job too. Back when I first started, those bosses were like, they were etched in stone. Like you knew that they made the decisions and, those things happen. Now it seems like, oh, well, you messed up, so you're done. Right. Like I understand CEOs of companies, same thing. This is police work is not a matter of dollars and cents. It's life and death in many situations. So political leaders need to pick the best people for those jobs and then stand behind them. They also need professional development too. Right.
Absolutely.
They need
absolutely.
They need those things. They need the confidence to make the decisions. That's one of the topics as you were talking about, like we're talking about budgets and cutting budgets and, de-escalation and training and all those things. Like what is the expectation of a human being? People make mistakes. We're not robots. We're not perfect. Right. So there has to be some sort of checks and balances. And I was always told that discipline is progressive. Someone makes a mistake, counsel them, and then you go to the next step and you go to the next step. Now we're throwing babies away with the bathwater, because of social media. Social media, in 1997, my partner and I stopped a guy, and as soon as he got out of the car, he was in my face screaming, telling me my mama did this, my mama did that. He's yelling and all those things. Now, I knew that the guy had some sort of, you could tell immediately that the man had some sort of mental gap, right? Challenge. I mean, right. He just wasn't, his actions were not what his words were, right? They were doing that stuff then, or in 2001 after 9/11, right? Day of 9/11, everyone gets called in. We're out patrolling. Downtown Chicago is like a ghost town. My partner and I go into Starbucks to get a coffee, right? And there's people in there and they start clapping and people are like, let us buy your coffee for you. Let us buy your coffee. 2 weeks later, Pat, I you not 2 weeks later, my partner and I go into the same Starbucks to get a coffee. And a lady no claps, no one's buying our coffee. And a lady standing behind us looks at us and goes, don't you guys have anything better to do than to stand around here and get coffee? And I looked at my partner and I went, oh, we're assholes again. That was short-lived. That was short-lived. So you're talking about 1997 and 2001, something that would happen regularly now. It would be posted all over, social media. Look at these cops getting coffee. God forbid they get a coffee. They have no idea that we haven't stopped in 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Right.
Yeah. Well, when you're on one call and you're just hoping that you get a break because you got to go to the bathroom so bad that right. you need a bathroom stop. And
right.
People that, when you sit in an office, you don't think about stuff like that when you're in a car and you're running car to car. Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't tell the story. I'm going to tell it anyway, just because.
Go ahead, please do. I got you doing things you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah. I've got a recruit with me who is now the chief of police. This is a long time ago. And awesome. he was he was my trainee, and it was a very busy night. we were on one call, and I've got to go to the bathroom bad, and we, we get to a resolution, and we're getting into the car, and then we get another call comes out, and it's basically a really bad domestic going, where we think we might have actually a hostage situation.
Mhm.
And so there's no, you're not stopping. Like, you can't go to the bathroom. You got to go. And so we get to that next call. We get there with the other group, and we're up on the door. We're trying to assess what's going on. Short version is, it's a very violent domestic going on behind the door, and there's some threats for violence. We have to kick in the door. We take the suspect into custody. Everything's, like, appears to be clear in the moment. And I, as soon as, like, we've got the suspect secure, I'm like, I'm going to check the second floor, secondary. So I run up the stairs. I've been in these apartments hundreds of times, so I know the layout. And, like, all I'm going up is look, peek, make sure no one else is there, and I have to go into the bathroom to use the bathroom. Because otherwise I'm going to wet my pants as a grown man adult.
Right.
And when I told some family and friends this story later, you get around, and once the stories start coming out a little bit, they're laughing. They think that's hysterical, and I think it's kind of funny now. But at the moment, I didn't think it was that funny, because I was like, I might actually. It's like I'm either crawling in the bushes right now, and they're going to have to wait for me to kick in that door, or we're taking some kind of action.
Right.
And I know I'm not the only one that's got stories like that. So
are you kidding me? Stopping in the middle of an alley in the city of Chicago on the west side. I'm like, I gotta go. You're out, and you're like, that's it. Watch my back. Here it goes. Right. Like, you're like looking around for
now imagine you're a female officer, right? For the female. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's this. I don't think people truly understand it. Being in academia now, like having these conversations with academics, like, we need to come up with solutions to, for police to be more effective. And I think to myself, like, you don't have an effing clue what you're talking about right now. You have never ever in your life been punched in the face at all, much less as a police officer. You've never been in a fight in your life. You've never been challenged ever, ever in your life. Because if you were, there's like boundaries, there's like human boundaries. My grandfather used to say, like, you could tell somebody something 100 times and you got to slap them. Right. Now, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. Right. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. You could do it figuratively, or you could do it realistically. Right. But you have these conversations, and like my mouth is wide open. Like, I cannot believe you're talking about this right now, because I said this once. I go, have you ever at 3 a.m. gone to a call where you walk in? Now, I'm 5'9", right? Average. You walk into a call, and there's a guy that's like 6'6", 300 pounds, just ripped, just got out of jail. He is ripped, right? He's been doing body weight exercises, lifting weights for the last 5 years. This guy is just buff. He's big. He's sweating. He's angry. He's high, right? And he just turned his grandmother's face in the hamburger because she just got yelled at him, told him stop drinking and smoking drugs in my house and get a job. And he decided to punch his grandma. And now grandma's like, take him to jail. Now you got grandma screaming. And then this guy's like, I'm not going to jail. And he takes his shirt off, kicks his shoes off, and goes, now what? You pepper spray him and he goes, right? Or you shoot him with the taser and he takes the prongs out and he throws them back at you. Right. Now you're like, okay, we got to go mechanical with this. Right. We got to go old school. Right. Here we go. And then you got to fight with this guy. Like, what is a social worker going to do there? Going to get thrown right out the window.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so,
and we've seen that happen already.
Right.
Several of those social workers have been killed in the line of duty already. But it doesn't get a lot of attention.
Correct, because it doesn't go with the dynamic. But regardless, when I'm having these discussions with people, I'm like, has that ever happened to you? Well, no. So do you think that a hug to this maladjusted gang member, like, hey man, bring it in for the real thing, bro. Right, let's hug it out. I know you have a bad family history. Your family of origin is skewed. Right. I understand. Let's sit down and talk. He don't want to talk to me. I'm the man. He wants to punch me in the face. That's it. Like, I'm not going to fix him. So
Nope, certainly not in that moment.
correct. So when we talk all the training in the world, all you have to include what I like to call the human condition or the human dynamic. You could talk to somebody in a hostage situation for an hour, 5 hours, 10 hours, right? Or a suicidal subject. You're talking to this person on the phone for hours. You got a good dynamic, you got good dialogue, and then just like this, you know what? Hey, thanks. Boom. That's it. It's over. Like without even warning. So you can have all these trainings and contingency plans and all this stuff, but you cannot account for the human condition or the human dynamic. I can't read people's minds.
Well, maybe someday we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, with AI,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, AI. That's in Neuralink.
Yeah.
We'll just hit the switch and shut them down for the night.
They'll enough. Send RoboCop.
Yeah,
dead or alive. Dead or alive, you're coming with
me.
Right.
Okay, so these are the challenges, right? And so one of the other conversations we got into, and I think it kind of ties into this. So you've got to train people, you've got to fund them, you got to fund the agencies so you can send them to training, and you have to have enough people to be able to get people off duty to be able to train. And every agency is going to be different. And so there are certain things that, as any police officer, anywhere in America, there's some core skills and abilities that we all need to have and be able to do. But then there are some nuances depending on what specifically your role is and what your agency mission is. So outside of that, you got to have sufficient people. So you have to have the funding to bring in enough bodies, and then you have to have enough bodies to not only be able to give them adequate time to train, but then also give them adequate time to train consistently over time. Because most of the skills that we're talking about are perishable skills. And you got to get in there and you got to train and you got to practice. A SWAT sniper taking, one shot a month with one round, isn't enough.
It wasn't even a month. It was like every 2 months or 3 months.
Yeah. And I think those are, so when we hear people talking about, doing evaluations of police departments and consent decrees are a whole nother thing, right? How much money do municipalities spend on consent decrees that could be spent on training? We're going to spend millions of dollars. We're going to pay an outside vendor to come in and tell police departments what they should be doing better. We're going to pay them 10 times what any one of those commanders or one of those police officers is getting paid. And then we're not going to have any accountability for the results from what I'm telling them that they should be doing. And now the agency and the municipality is on the hook for the spend. And I'm not saying there isn't some benefit that can come from those programs, but I think again, as a country, if we're going to reimagine policing and we're going to reinvest in policing, then that has to be one of the things that we look at. Are these consent decrees worthwhile? What are we benefiting from them? And is it improving? What does the data suggest? Is it improving the profession? Or I think as we're seeing, if you follow Bob Scales at all on LinkedIn, he's very outspoken about some of the things. And I don't think he's necessarily anti-police reform. I think he's just been there. He's had firsthand experience in a large police department trying to manage a consent decree, and it's bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, for all its great intent, sometimes just gets in the way and makes things even more challenging. So we got to find the money to pay for the people, to pay for the training and the equipment, and do it in sufficiently, with sufficiently and adequately. So you can't expect professional performance when you don't invest professionally in their performance.
Well, yeah. I mean, 100% agreed. And with Bob Scales, I agree with many of his points. I quote one of the old timers I used to work with, so again, I'd have 31 if I were still on the job. This guy would have, 51 if he were still on the job. And, he looked at me once and goes, all this stuff is a racket, kid. It's all a racket. It's all a racket, right? So you have people that have incredible experience and incredible backgrounds, right? That could do much of this training. Now, when you look at it from a perspective of someone on the outside, you think, oh, these officers are doing, they're trying to address this and police the consent decrees and all that stuff. Great. Okay. But when you have a bureaucracy that, here, example, in 2005, we wrote a grant, the UASI, Urban Areas Security Initiative, after 9/11, right? So the city of Chicago got a buku bucks, right? So we put night vision goggles in there. In 2005, SWAT team in Chicago did not have night vision goggles. So we put in there, we want night vision goggles, right? So in 2008, we still did not have night vision goggles. And one of my colleagues was shot in an alley, a sergeant on the SWAT team. The vest and his PMAG stopped the round, right? We did a presentation at the I2A Illinois Tactical Officer Association annual conference. We did it on it. We had the pictures, everything. This individual was highly motivated, came out of the gangway and shot him. So someone, and I don't know who, it could have been me, could have been the former commander who's now passed on, so we'll just leave that alone, wrote a to-from to the deputy chief and said, had this sergeant been wearing night vision goggles, that may have stopped him from getting shot. Something along those lines.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, about 6 months later, we got night vision goggles, right? And then we had to argue that we did not want the technology that we wrote for in 2005. It's 2008. We got better technology. And you had to argue about that. Well, this is what you asked for. Yeah, in 2005. So that bureaucracy, I mean, seriously, like that bureaucracy is frustrating. Or yes, we don't have a contract with this company. Well, they make the premier armored vehicle. Another story, another firsthand. They make the premier, the Lenko Bearcat at that time is the premier armored vehicle. Right?
I would probably still is, yeah.
Correct. Every suburb around us, we have this ILEAS in Illinois. They have the Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System, right? So you have, it's a mutual aid pact, MOUs with counties and everything like that. So basically, emergency in Chicago, people are coming from the suburbs, right? Well, to get them to actually go outside the contract, true story, we had to stress interoperability. Like, I was blown when you get into those positions, and this, when you're working the street is easy. The street stuff handles itself. When you get in the administrative positions, that's when you're going and you're like, I'm going to bang my head right here for the next half hour. Right? Because it's absolutely crazy. So when you get in those positions, so that I think is the problem, Pat, is like the bureaucracy of it. Like, if you have the chief executive officer from a business standpoint, which would be your chief, coming to your mayor, right, saying, hey, or your chief operations, whatever you want to call them in law enforcement in the business world, we need this. This is what we need, right? The process shouldn't, I understand legality, I understand things like that, but I mean, come on. The night vision thing, that's a true story. The Bearcat thing, that's a true story. It took us 2 years to get the Bearcat. But the Chicago Police Department SWAT team, the suburban areas around us have this already. So I think what you're talking about, that the bureaucracy is one of the things that needs to be enhanced. It's not so much the police. We're doing what we can. The bosses are doing what they can, but you have to untie their hands. I think the money that you spend on things because of contractual agreements and things like that, maybe you may be able to save money if you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, budgets they're a beast in and of themselves, because there are sides to budgets. You have in Indiana, you have the State Board of Accounts, and then you have rules about what money can be spent on what. So it can, the frustrating part sometimes can be is like, hey, here are things that we know that we need, but there just isn't the money there. Like, there is no money. So now you've got to make decisions about, okay, well, you have to prioritize, what are we going to spend money on? But then, on the flip side to that too is, if you have ideas and suggestions and for things that you want, write that proposal, make that needs assessment, and provide some data that can support it, and then you try to build that into your budget as you go. So
Correct.
sometimes guys get a little frustrated because, hey, I want this and I want it tomorrow, and it's just like, well, I can't snap my fingers and make it happen tomorrow.
Correct. Understood.
Private sector, they can do that kind of stuff, right? If they've got the money and they're smart, and if it's going to be a good business spend. But we don't produce widgets in policing, right? We're not. Right. We can't forecast in the same way. So you do have to think long term. And but it all comes down to spending, right? It does come down to budgets, and in the end, it really does come down to money and how much communities, and what we're seeing right now, even like officers are leaving the Chicagos, the Minneapolis, the Seattle, the Indianapolis metro. Their officers are leaving those departments and going to your ring cities, your suburbs that do have very strong support from their community, and they have strong financial support. So, they're going to go, which is opposite to what it used to be 10, 15 years ago, right? You used to have the reverse trend. And now we're seeing that it's really, it's kind of like a traffic flow pattern, right? Oh man, yeah, we definitely got off on a tangent there, which is interesting.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, I mean, the training, but like, I understand the budgetary confinements and all the laws and everything like that. But I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that you have to wait 2 years to get something
for Chicago PD. That blows me away a little bit, for such a large agency. That's
priorities, people. In a police department like Chicago, there people have specialties, right?
Right.
So you may have someone once asked me, like, what was the hardest part about being a Chicago police officer? Like seeing all the stuff on the street. I'm like, no, that stuff kind of handled itself. It was dealing with, not all leaders now. Please don't take offense, but dealing with inept leadership. Right, like not you, but
trust me,
like leaders on Chicago.
I'm sure I've had my fair share of critics,
right? Like they know who they are, that are inept, or pretending to be something they're not, or that was probably, and I've talked about this with my students, like, am I crazy feeling this way? Like, no. So if I had to put money into something, it would be it would be good training, right? Because the ideology of any training is good training. No, good training is good training, right? And I would put it in wellness, right? Like, and then finding ways to enhance work-life balance. Because like right now, people in Chicago, they're getting their days off canceled again. People are working all these shifts. I mean, it's affecting their relationships. It's affecting their communication. It's affecting their performance, because the number one thing, I mean, you were talking about strength and conditioning, right? You were talking about that earlier. You do that.
Right.
So what's the number one thing? Rest, sleep,
recovery.
So how the hell are you supposed to do that if you can't get a freaking day off? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't. And that just puts more, got a great episode, coming up with Yulise Balban. She's a researcher from Stanford. She has a product that's coming out. I don't want to spoil the episode, but stay tuned for it. But there's a perfect example of someone in the academic world that's really trying to make an impact in policing, and going along with budgets, right? One of the things that, where she's experiencing a little frustration, and like a lot, now that I'm on the outside, working with a few startup companies here and there, that's the struggle, right? It's people do want to help the police, and they've got some great products and some great ideas, some great, there is some good training that's out there, but there's just no money. The money's just not there.
There's no money. You know how many things I've done free for police departments? Now, don't start calling me everyone asking me. Like I got a lit, right? Like I got kids, what I mean? So, and all joking aside, for free, like leadership stuff, just frontline leadership stuff, or even wellness. Like, a day, hey, I'll come out there for 4, 5, 6 hours, whatever you need, because no one has a budget. for that. I mean, it's really incredible. I mean, you're expecting perfection out of imperfect human beings to begin with. So why not give them all the tools to be as perfect as they possibly can? You know, um, and you're just simply not doing that. So that that leaves a lot of room for problems.
Yes. All right. So now let's talk solutions. Let's
Yeah.
and you just kind of touched on it. Obviously, cop optimization is the theme of the show. And that's something that you have invested in yourself significantly, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you have gone above and beyond. And you have inside, most police departments usually have some kind of college tuition reimbursement plan. And without even getting into the whole conversation about who makes the best cop, is it the college graduate? Is it the military veteran, combat veteran? Is it, the father of three? Who is it? And in the end, I think the simple answer is it's any of the above or none of the above. It really is individually based. And um, with that in mind, once you get somebody in your agency, I think the education is critically important, and agencies should do whatever they can to support officers getting, continuing their education, provide ongoing training on the job. But then also, I think there also has to be an individual investment where people are going to just make the decision, like, hey, like I want to be better, and I'm going to invest in myself. So it sounds like you've gone down that you've gone really way above and beyond with all the
Well,
education that you have. So I mean, what would be your number one, I guess your position on that, and then two, your suggestions for young officers who are, trying to decide, should I go back to school or not?
well, education is important. For me, it was very important, right? I went to community college while I was working as a community service officer. And then when my opportunity came to become a full-time sworn police officer, I left college to take that job. You didn't need college at the time, when I got on the job. So, but like Chicago now, to be a lieutenant, you need a bachelor's degree, and I always wanted to, when I got my degree in leadership, I got it because I'm like, I want to be the superintendent of police someday. I had lofty goals, and to back up those goals, I needed education. I think education does a couple of things. It doesn't only prepare you for your career in law enforcement, it prepares you for the afterlife, the after law enforcement job. Also, for me, it was a positive thing to keep my mind occupied. I struggle with alcoholism. I'm a sober man, right? By the grace of God today. And also the steps, for me, I believe in a higher power. And it kept my mind in a positive place. Because if I wasn't reading or writing papers or doing something, I'd be drinking and acting like a fool. Right. So for
Right.
me, it was several things. But I would tell a young police officer, get your education, while you're young, while you're working. And if your department has a tuition reimbursement, Chicago has one, right? They have an incredible tuition reimbursement plan. They pay for a bachelor's degree 100% for 2 classes a semester if you get an A. If you get a B, the percentage goes down. And then for masters, they pay 75% for 2 classes a semester. I mean, that's incredible. And
That's amazing.
our college gives the other 25%. We have a scholarship. So essentially you can go to school. I'm not pumping my school. I'm just giving you an example. You can come to Calumet College and get a bachelor's and a master's degree if you're a Chicago police officer and never pay a cent if you get an A, right? So why wouldn't you do something like that? I mean, it just benefits you. I've seen a study about a study that said a college educated police officer will help save people of color's lives. That was a recent study. But if you go back to the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, they did that in the early 2000s. They did a similar study, or late, you know, uh, 1990s, where they said, a college educated police officer uses less medical time, has less complaints for excessive force, is, better with multiple cultures, exposure to that in college. So, Pat, I got to agree with you. I don't know if that's true. I mean, you can get a military veteran with the same thing, right?
Right.
It's an individual thing. It's like, what makes a great leader? Are they born, or are they taught? And to be a really great leader, I think it's a combination of both. You have to have some, skills that you were born with that you hone over time through experience and education. That is optimization, right? So,
Absolutely.
so I think that I would tell a young police officer, get your education, get it in something that you're interested in. If it's public safety, get it in public safety from a college. If it's criminal justice, get in criminal justice. You want to go to law school, go to law school. That's what I would tell a police officer, because it's only going to benefit you on the job. Your mind, when you take promotional exams, you're already used to studying. You're already used to doing things like that. So you're in school, your brain is in school environment, your brain is in, reading and retention of material. So when you go for that promotional exam, you're already a step ahead. That makes sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think sometimes people, maybe mistake the idea that I can't be an effective police officer if I don't have a college degree. Not true. You can be
Not
very
true at all.
effective.
Not true at all.
What exposing yourself to new educational opportunities, whether it is through training or formal education, it opens you up to new ideas and new potential. So you can see a different way. And now, in the end, what you're really doing is you're putting more tools in your tool belt. You're getting that exposure to the possibility of a more efficient and effective way to do things. I used to use this example. I don't know if this is a good example or not. I'm like, go back into caveman times, and this is what I used to when I was talking with young officers. On one side, you got a big lake, right? And these two villages on opposite sides of the lake. And on one side, you've got a village that has carts where they're hauling heavy stuff around, and they have figured out an axle, and they figured out somewhat of a wheel. And the more they pull this cart around, the harder they work at it. The edges of those wheels start to smooth out. The wheels become smoother, and eventually they figure out, wow, if we just create these round wheels, we can really move more stuff more efficiently. And on the opposite side of the lake, where people don't try to use new tools or new ideas or new things, they're still carrying stuff on their back, and they're doing things in a less efficient manner. And I mean, there are examples as far back as a millennia, right? On
Right.
where technology and where improvements actually, things get better. And the other, so I'm like, yeah, there's just two examples that maybe not great examples, but in today's day and age, when I started in 1995 in a squad car, I did time in military police in the Air Force as well, but I had a mobile radio, I had my gun belt, I had a 357. I had a collapsible baton, a pair of handcuffs, and that's pretty much it, and a portable radio on my hip. And today's car is, now you have a laptop, you have a dash cam, you have radar, you have cell phones, you've got so much technology, so much stuff going on in a car. At the core, does it make you a better police officer? Well, maybe not. I mean, it's still the person in the car that's got to operate all that. I guess what I'm trying to say is the times change, equipment changes, technology changes. We find new and improved ways to do things. We gain efficiencies, we get better, we learn, and then we recycle, and we go through these cycles again and again and again. And education is just that way to challenge yourself personally, to learn more, to be exposed to more, so you can challenge your own ideas and your own thoughts and your own beliefs, and then put those to work to be a higher level professional on what you're already doing.
So agreed, right? And going back to your point about having all these tools, right? When I came on the job, pepper spray, gun, extra magazines, baton. I didn't even have a collapsible baton, so you were a step ahead, right? We didn't have that. We still had the wooden stick, right? So tools are great. Tools are awesome, but it's the person using the tools. I don't golf, right? Because I used to before my hand injury. Now I can't, right? So I will go on a golf outing with my friends just to get some fresh air, kind of hang out for some laughs and watch them try to golf, right? So you'll take one of them will walk up to a ball and take a swing and miss or dub it, and then they throw the club and they start hitting the club on the ground. And I look at them and say the same thing every time, Pat. And I know they want to kill me when I do it. I look at them and I go, I guarantee it's not the club. But what it is operator error for sure. And they're usually like, shut the F up, man. I hate you. I don't know why you come here. You don't even golf, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, right. So, you can have all those tools, but if you don't know how to use them effectively, if you don't train with them or you're not taught how to use those things, as a wellness coach and mental health therapist, I do those things with police officers largely, right? I also deal with special needs families, right? And when you talk to everybody, everyone's looking, I need to change. I need to do this. I need to do that. The first thing I tell them is education, right? Second thing I tell them is training, right? You have to keep your sword sharp. You have to continually go to processes, learn new things, do continuing education, right? As a therapist, as a wellness coach, as an instructor, you have to do that too as a student, as someone, a police officer. I would also tell young police officers this. On the Chicago Police Department, when I was there, I spent a lot of money out of pocket on my own training. I paid out of pocket to go to trainings. And people would say, like, why are you doing that? If they wanted you to do that, they'd pay for it. And I'm like, because it's my life. It's my life, and if they really rode me, I'm like, man, I hope you get a 9mm because I might need your bullets. I might have to take them off your dead body, and they'd be like, oh man, you're a jerk. And I'm like, well, just leave me alone. Right. So you constantly have to keep that sword sharp, right? Sharpened, yeah. Right. You have to keep it sharp. And the only way to do that is through new experiences. And that could be education. That could be going and getting some sort of mental health therapy or some coaching. Do something. Don't just sit there and don't wait. And there's another thing, and I'm not getting on a younger generation. I love you guys. I really do. Right. But here's the thing. No one's going to come and help you. No one's going to volunteer to say, you know what, Pat, I think you're a great guy. Let me give you the keys to the kingdom. You got to earn them. We all had to earn that. Nothing's changed. If anything, it's harder with social media and things like that. Right. People now, I don't know how many videos I see. You see the same thing. Everyone sees it. And everyone asks the same question. Like, there's a police officer fighting with some guy on the street and the guy's getting the better of the police officer. How many angles of video do they have of that with people with their phones instead of someone coming up and helping?
Yeah, put the phone down and go help.
Right. So we're all dealing with this dynamic that's unique and it's new, but everything changes. So go learn how to deal with that. Police officers coming on the job now are used to that technology. I mean, they have this, and it's always in their face, right? I mean, their phone is always in their face, and I had a lieutenant friend of mine who I went to grade school with her, and she told me she went to roll call one night and she had to tell everybody, put your phones down during roll. I couldn't even imagine doing that to some of my bosses,
Oh my gosh, no way.
Right. So taking the opportunities to keep your sword sharpened is very important. And if you don't do it, then your expectation cannot be excellence, right? You cannot expect yourself to be excellent or the performance that you're doing to be excellent because you're just simply not working on excellence.
I love it. Well, we've been going almost 90 minutes now.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a better way to end it than with that right there. We're going to have to do part 2 because I got a lot of things I didn't even touch on. We got on a couple of tangents.
Yeah.
But that's all right. I really appreciate this. So I know there was some things I didn't touch on, but any questions, anything that you want to, maybe close out on before we wrap it up for tonight? But I really do appreciate your time. I appreciate all your self-investment and your continued love for the profession, your desire to raise the next generation of cops, and your work with the university to educate the next generation of cops. So that's quite a noble calling. Well,
I'd like to close by saying thanks for having me on, Pat. It it was really an honor to be part of this. I've listened to podcasts, very impressive. And I can appreciate what you're doing for our brothers and sisters, our family business, right?
Right on.
Like this is our family. I would close by saying, make sure you take care of yourself. It's not, there's no, the word stigma, and I have to bring this up. The word stigma is not realistic, right? Especially for your mental health. If you see something and it's bothering you, go get some help, right? There's plenty of people that you can see. I've seen a therapist for years. I'm not ashamed. Make sure you take care of yourself and make sure your priorities are correct. And what I mean by that is like you have to be a healthy individual to be a good family member. And you have different life roles. You're not just a police officer and that's it. You could be a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, a son, a daughter. Make sure your priorities are in line and make sure you take care of yourself and find that balance so you can do a career and walk away from this unscathed and maybe find a new career because you're still young, So, and if anyone ever needs anything from me, just reach out.
Where can they get in touch with you? The email or anything like that you want to share?
Yeah, sure. There's a few different ways you can get a hold of me. One is my email at the college, which is dmcguire@ccsj.edu, and that's DMCGUIRE at ccsj.edu, or you can reach me at Danny at Crosstown Wellness, and that's Danny DANNY at CROSSTOWNWELLNESS.com.
And we'll try to throw those in the show notes as well.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, sir. Really appreciate it. So
Yeah.
On that note, let's hire healthy, let's retire healthy, and let's bankrupt our pension systems because we're living long, happy, healthy lives.
All right.
All right. Till our next episode. Appreciate everyone spending some of your valuable time with us. And it will be 10:42. Log into www.performance-protocol and learn more about how to bring this program to your agency and community.